where the concept comes from, but the concept of a cognitive load in gaming is just the idea that everything that you put in adds to the amount of effort that the player is having to go through in order to play your game, and you need to make sure that it's worth it. It's a cost-benefit calculation.
Hi friends, Craig here. Today we're talking to James Baldwin, the creator and designer of Drowned Earth Miniatures game. We spent a good bit of time talking about his design process, how he goes about creating a game and figuring out some of the mechanics as well as the theme. Make sure you stick around to the end. He's got a fascinating new mini game coming out called Ulaya Chronicles. It's currently on Kickstarter, and what's neat about it is it's got solo and cooperative play. Enjoy.
Playing a tabletop strategy game allows you to unplug and test your skills against friends. Every week, Third Floor Wars delivers useful strategies, discussions, battle reports, and reviews to tabletop games like Malifaux. If you want to get better at the games you already play, or discover the games other people are playing, you are in the right place. Craig and Ray welcome you to the Third Floor and the Tabletop Talk broadcast.
Craig here on the Third Floor. Today, we're going to get some insider insights from the creator of the Drowned Earth Miniatures game, James Baldwin. Now, currently, he has another game on Kickstarter set in the same universe called Ulaya Chronicles. So, James, welcome to the Third Floor.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, James, one of the first things we like to find out from somebody who's never been on the show before is kind of how did you get into this hobby? So how did you become a miniature gamer?
Well, we have to go back a good more than 3 decades to, I think there were there were 3 seminal moments in my gaming life. One was after coming back from primary school, aged 7 or thereabouts. Primary school is not a term you guys use, but just
we know what you mean.
The age is probably the better thing. When you say grade whatever, I'm like, no idea what that means. But my mum read me The Hobbit while I was eating when I came back from school and had my tea. I don't know how long it went on for. She recorded it actually on cassette tape. And God knows where that is now. Unfortunately, it's been lost. But that was number one, my introduction into what I call speculative fiction. Yeah. And so step number 2 was not too long after that. We were all, approaching 9, 10, 11. We were exchanging and swapping and handing around Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone Choose Your Own Adventure fighting fantasy novels, and I can't remember the name of it, but at some stage there's an advanced one which is basically a soft entry into proper games master versus players role playing, and so that was step number 2. This is a concept that I was fascinated. I don't remember us ever actually doing it. I think we still carried on reading the books, but I certainly read that book and was captivated by the idea. And then a little, again, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, it's hard to remember, the fighting fantasy novels turned into issues of White Dwarf magazine. And I'm talking about 123, 128, the early 30s, that kind of thing. And, back when Marauder Miniatures were a separate entity to Citadel, and I bought myself some Marauder Miniatures Dwarf Slayers, and I've still got them, the originally painted versions. And a friend of mine, as a Hanukkah present, he got HeroQuest, and so we could just about afford a couple of models with our pocket money, but we couldn't play a proper game. And then obviously we were playing with Dwarf Slayers in HeroQuest, and back in the days with Games Workshop was very, cut out a tank and glue it together from a cereal box kind of thing.
Which you would get in the White Dwarf. So they would have White Dwarf that would like teach you how to make terrain out of cardboard and everything like that. And you don't see those. You don't see that anymore in the magazine.
Unfortunately, you don't. I think there was a great joy in it. The kind of what we call the Blue Peter approach. There's a children's TV program and here's one I made earlier, where they tell you how to make things out of loo roll and cereal packets and candy floss. It was just sort of going on from that sort of late 80s. Ethos, and then I just sort of went down the rabbit hole of Games Workshop, but also role play games, and I never actually played D&D until I suppose about 4 years ago. A friend of mine did some D&D at his stag party, and that was the first time. But I was playing Vampire the Masquerade and Cyberpunk and Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the second edition, and stuff like that. And then I got to about 16 and decided that girls wouldn't like me if they realized I had painted little toy soldiers, and then went on a hiatus until I was about 30, when I realized that all I did was work all the time and I didn't have a hobby. And I decided that gaming was going to be my hobby again. And it sort of got out of control after that.
It's funny. I mean, my story is very similar. I didn't quite start quite as young as you did, but that idea of this hiatus is something that I'm hearing a lot from different guests. And I went through the same experience. So like I played up till like mid high school, and then kind of it kind of drifted away, and then just found it again, in my early 30s and kind of dove right back into it. And it's funny how you take that break. And I had the same thing, James, where it's just like, all I do is work, right? I need something else, another outlet, another way to use different parts of my brains. And it was neat to come back full circle, to that world itself. And you talk about a bigger circle. So my start is with role playing. Around the same age you've discovered role playing, and I have just found it again like 3 months ago. And so I took a nice 25-year break from it. And boy, now that I'm back doing role playing again, I've been having a great time with it. I forgot how much I loved it. We're playing the Fantasy Flight Star Wars, the Edge of Empire.
Yeah, and I really like that system.
Oh, well, it's based off of the Warhammer fantasy role play with that narrative dice, which, for an old dude like me that took 25 years off from role playing, everything was D6s and D10s and everything at target numbers. That concept of the narrative dice and the interplay between the player and the GM deciding how things really happen. Like I am all in. I just think it's a really neat innovation.
Yeah. And I think what's nice about what they've done with that system is that there are all kinds of really obscure indie RPGs that experiment with that idea and like no GM at all and collaborative storytelling and stuff like that. So recently I was playing a game called The Sprawl, which is the Powered by the Apocalypse system, and it's very much like that. And I think for me it was a bridge too far, because I felt there's an awful lot. You kind of bank points and retcon, and you're allowed to and encouraged to retcon things that happen, because you should be prepared, and you're an expert, and you might not be an expert, whatever your character is, but they will be. And so that's allowed within the system. And what I found was, although it was a really interesting experience to sit around the table and just brainstorm ideas, I never felt fully immersed in the sessions. But
you were metagaming too much.
Exactly. Yeah. There was that. There was always that. Not always, actually. There were a few really beautiful moments where you weren't, where you felt quite involved. But most of the time, there was that distance. And in the Star Wars system, I think it's controlled in a very nice way. And that neatly segues me onto, if you back the Kickstarter for £1, then you will get a free copy of what I call a one page, but actually it's one sheet, one shot RPG set in the Drowned Earth, which is super simple. I mean, it's only 2 pages. It has to be simple. But it also has that same idea of the collaboration and encouraging. So there's a special, we use the same dice as the miniatures game because it makes sense.
Sure.
And when you roll that special symbol, you are encouraged to provide, so you do something especially well, and you are invited to suggest to the GM what that is. And likewise, when bad things happen, both the players and the GM are encouraged to have that kind of collaboration, but in a more controlled way. Right. And that was definitely influenced by the Star Wars system. I like it a lot.
That's very, very cool. So, guys, fans of the show know that I love talking to people that are in the gaming industry. Now, a few years ago, James made a huge splash with his game called Drowned Earth. It was a very successful Kickstarter. And unlike a lot of other Kickstarters out there, the game still exists. It actually has shown legs, and I would imagine grown, because I was not aware of Drowned Earth when the Kickstarter came out, but I keep hearing more and more rumbles about it. I've got more and more friends saying, Craig, you need to check this out. And I would venture to guess probably one of the more popular indie games that are out there today. So James, I'd like to first kind of get an idea of your transition. So you're a player, you enjoy playing role-playing games, you enjoy tabletop games, miniature games. At one point, does game design start tickling the back of your head?
Well, so I mean, it's a famous quote, and I don't know who said it, but everybody's got at least one novel in them, and I don't feel like that's necessarily true, but I feel like everybody's got one creative achievement of some kind in them. And I think a lot of us gamers, while we're gaming, we're interested in mechanics, and we're interested in different ways of doing things. And we sort of, armchair managers, football managers, sitting there discussing, well, if I was Arsene Wenger, the manager of Manchester United or whatever, I wouldn't have made that choice. I'd have done it this way. And gamers are the same. Lots of us have these kinds of conversations with each other. There was a certain time where that begun to percolate into, no, I actually think I'm beginning to form my ideal vision of what my game, what my novel, what my creative achievement might look like. I had a job and financial responsibilities and all of that kind of stuff. So it wasn't something that I was taking very seriously at that time. And I was working on a couple of kind of fan-driven design projects for another game that existed but was forgotten and neglected by a company who's more latterly revived it again, which is great news. But I remember having to have conversations with the people that I was working with and justifying what I thought were fairly basic principles, like the fact that some kind of balance is important in a game. It doesn't need to be perfectly balanced. You don't need to make you don't need to design the life out of the thing. Right. And you're allowed to have some fun. But the idea that something shouldn't be so wildly unbalanced that one player, simply by choosing a particular faction, has zero chance of ever winning, that's a bad thing. You'd think that was not something that you needed to have that conversation with. And there sort of came a point where I thought, if this is how I'm currently exploring this creative outlet and this desire to design, and it's kind of hard work doing it with other people who don't share your core ethos. So I then started to look again part-time, and again while I was working and doing all the things that life requires. I began to look for people to collaborate with, because I liked the idea of doing something with a group of people, or at least one other person, more than just doing it by myself. I suppose I'll just say it. People are unreliable. People have different levels of commitment to the ideas. People find saying yes very easy, but actually following through much more difficult. And it became clear to me. And keeping the steam too, right?
Yeah, exactly. They might come in full, right? They come in full fludge right out of the beginning, and then they lose that interest trails. That's tough.
Yeah, and it's natural. And I think even as one person and it's only you, it's difficult to maintain that enthusiasm and to follow through. So, no hard feelings there. But I just found myself in a position where I thought, yeah, if I'm going to do anything like this, I'm just going to do it myself alone.
So in that process, James, did you like just have a couple of like premise ideas, like mechanics ideas, and have, a notebook that you kind of jotted it down, and then all of a sudden, you started going, well, I think I've got the beginnings of a game here. Like, I guess because we've all had those conversations, James, but at some point you said, wait a second, I'm on the brink of something new.
Well, so I would say I'm probably more of an experience-led designer than a mechanics-led designer. And I came with a very clear idea of the kind of experience I wanted the player to have. And then I looked around for the mechanics, and the sort of rules way to execute that and to give that experience. And so I arrived, when I first started, and it definitely started off as a side project. It wasn't until I thought, I'm onto something here, that I thought, okay, so now I'm coming to the crossroads where I need to decide, am I going to really take this seriously or not? And I decided to, but it was definitely after looking for the best ways to resolve some of the things that I thought were interesting and principally that didn't really exist already, because there's not a great deal of point in making something that's already there. You might cherry pick different ideas from different places, but you fuse them into something that's unique.
So instead of cherry picking and saying, I like this from this game, I like that from that game, it sounds to me like you were doing more finding gaps, where you're saying, this is missing, and I want to solve for these, and that ended up forming kind of the structure.
Yeah, and in other places, it was a case of saying, I like what this game is trying to do, but I don't think it does it as well. That's not its main focus, and it's not doing it as well as my game could if I chose to make that a serious priority. And one of those was the movement system, and the having a very, very fluid way of running up a wall and jumping to another building in mid climb, and then carry on running, and then in the middle of that whole thing shooting at someone, and then having that person shoot back at the same time. Well, those are a very complicated sequence of actions, and most games, the reason why you don't end up doing things like that very often is because they're usually pretty complicated to resolve. And so for me, one of my big design goals for the game was to build a very robust system of mechanics that would very easily and in a very streamlined way allow you to do lots of really cool stuff, basically.
Right. So it sounds like, having a fluid, easy to resolve movement system was a goal. What were the other gaps you were trying to fill? What were the kind of the idea goals going into this? What things you wanted to fix, things you saw as problems elsewhere that you did not want to see in your game?
Well, so I think the goals I gave myself really were that kind of parkour style of movement and a very cinematic experience where in fact, I can put it very, very simply. What I wanted to achieve was a game where at the end of it, the players went off to their friends and told them about the cool things that happened in their game without ever mentioning the dice, without ever mentioning any mechanics. They just told the story because the game was executing that cinematic experience well enough that it completely bypassed the mechanics, and that's not what they were thinking about. And I'm pleased to say I'm actually really proud of it. I'm not, I have achieved that, because that's definitely when you go to tournaments and people are playing and you sort of pretend you're reading something, but actually you're eavesdropping on their conversation. That's what they do. They really don't talk too much about the mechanics, and it's more about your massive, gorilla person leapt out of a building with his twin pistols, and in midair shot this other guy who was running across a rope bridge. And as he fell into the water, got attacked by a giant piranha. And so, mission accomplished kind of thing.
Yes. So just making sure that the mechanics didn't get in the way of the narrative and of the story. Does that sound right?
And so I think to make that kind of cinematic experience, a reaction mechanic is really essential. The idea of creating a game where both players are involved all of the time. So the Drowned Earth is both alternate activation. So you activate a model and then someone else does, but it also has a reaction mechanic. And so you don't have to wait very long for your turn, but at the same time, during somebody else's turn, you're probably doing as much as they are. And if you're not doing as much as they are, their turn is going to be super quick.
So I've not played Drowned Earth yet. And like I said, I've been hearing so many good things about it. And you're quite a good little salesman. I like everything you're saying. But what I'm hearing a little bit is some Infinity, right?
Yep.
And people that have listened to the show before know that I love the goals of Infinity. I don't care for the game. I think the game fails on many ways of trying to do what it achieved. And just on the reaction mechanic itself, did you look and see like something like Infinity and go, yeah, I see what they're trying to do, but I think I can do better?
Yeah, and actually, I played the second edition of Infinity when the English rulebook was still really, really hard to get to grips with, but just in terms of the language, not even in terms of how overwrought the rules are. And I think that's. I say overwrought. They're overwrought for me and possibly for you as well.
Correct. But there's people that love it. So that's
and for a lot of people, that's the selling point. That real intricacy of the rules is one of the big selling points for the game. So there's nothing to be said against that. It's just a matter of taste. But I felt that Infinity, as far as a reaction mechanic, I think that was the best executed one that I'd seen. The Drowned Earth reaction mechanic, it's not mechanically that similar. Well, it is. You've got a target number and you're rolling under the number but over your opponent, so that's exactly the same. We're rolling 2d10 all of the time. There's no concept of rolling multiple, no concept of a dice pool for different types of weapon, and the two dice just correspond to two different levels of success, and the levels of success both determine how far you can shoot and how much damage you do. And so the mechanic is quite different, but it feels the same as the Infinity mechanic, the reaction mechanic at least. I think very little else about the game is similar. But I think my problem with Infinity was that, and not just Infinity, this was a general design goal for the Drowned Earth, because of a lot of different games I've played which do this to greater or lesser degrees. But I think Infinity might be the most egregious example of it. I don't want to spend 2 hours playing a game and spend an hour and 10 minutes looking through a rule book.
Yep.
Like, that's rubbish. That's not what I'm there for. And so I felt as though the reason why that's true in a lot of games is because there are too many exceptions to rules. There are too many special skills. And the special skills that there are, rather than them being like Blood Bowl is a good example, an example of this done well. There are quite a lot of skills in Blood Bowl, but the reason why they're easy to remember is that many of them are variations on a theme. So you get a reroll. And then this other skill, you get a reroll, and the mechanic is exactly the same, but you just get that reroll in a different circumstance, or on a different skill, or on a different stat, or something like that. And so all of those are really easy to remember. There might be 10 of them, but they are basically different variations on the same concept. And so whatever there are, 30 or 40 different skills are very easy to remember. I don't think they are in Infinity, and there are other games as well. And in Infinity in particular, I remember a really ridiculous situation where you've got what is it? Martial arts level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. So rather than that being the same thing in increasing levels of effectiveness, they all do totally different things. Right. And then level 3, you also get this other completely random skill that sounds nothing like what it actually is mechanically. And it's just this kind of arcane bizarre. It reminded me of playing BattleTech in the 80s, where you've got this huge tome that you're wading through, and you've got these charts. And actually, there's something really lovely about that kind of really archaic style of gaming, where you've got all of these lookup charts and what kind of damage have we done, and roll on it, and then check out the little boxes. I didn't get, there's a joy to that with BattleTech that I didn't find with Infinity. It just felt frustrating.
It that's got to be a tough balance. And after the break, we're going to talk a little bit more about the design process. But so I my primary game is Malifaux, which is I consider a modern rule set, but it is not a simple rule set. And it's a very intricate game. And a game takes 3-4 hours, depending on, how things going. Then what has become my second game is Marvel Crisis Protocol, which is a very interesting design shift, because in many ways, MCP is very streamlined. It simplifies a lot, and it sacrifices realism, quote unquote, or trying to mimic rules, mimic life, to just say, look, these are superheroes, and we're gonna keep it simple.
So it's sort of abstracted. A lot of things
very
are
much so.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to me, and we'll get into it more after the break, but I'll be very interested to learn how you navigate that spectrum, because I would imagine you're getting pulled through the process on that. So let's go ahead and take a break, James. When we get back from the break, I want to talk about really what that process is like, where you go, one direction, pull yourself back, you go another direction, pull yourself back, and how you end up at the end point. So we'll be right back.
If you're an athlete, the greatest motivator of all is the fear of letting your teammates down. After all, a team is only as good as its weakest link. So you owe it to those wearing the same jersey as you to be your best every time you step on the field. That's why there's no vape in team. When you vape, you can expose your lungs to toxic chemicals that can damage your lungs. If you're a step behind, the team's a step behind. Brought to you by The Real Cost and the FDA.
So now that we kind of, get a little bit of idea of the way James approached this, and how he, kind of decided, hey, I want to take a shot at this. I want to learn, one of the things that I find the most fascinating is that process of going from start to finish. So James, let's go to where we were before the break, which is you have found some goals. You want something that's cinematic. You want something where the rules don't get in the way. You want something where it's about the feeling and the narrative that happens versus on this table, I rolled this and I happened to get the 20 and that caused this to happen. As you started going through this, can you give me an idea of kind of the first time that Drowned Earth hit the table, in its very first version, where you took all of these notes, all of these thoughts, and put the first set of proxy miniatures on the table and said, let's give this a run? What did that look like?
It looked like, visually it looked awful. We found a whole load of really, really old school, I can't even remember what it was called, but Games Workshop made in the 90s a sort of grey polystyrene castle, which all sort of like squeezed together or fitted together. And if you bought 3 or 4 sets, you could do this like really elaborate thing. But it was really like super blocky. And because Drowned Earth's a game where you really, you find, as you're teaching people, because of the movement system, and because of we encourage people to use multi-level scenery and walkways, and you can do a lot of leaping and jumping and climbing and that kind of thing. There's a kind of eureka moment that you get as you're giving someone a demo, where you can see them stop thinking in 2D and they start thinking in 3D. And so that was another design aim to begin with, to have really interactive scenery that made a really significant. They weren't just obstacles, right. They were opportunities to navigate the battlefield. And so, first off, I think the game was clunkier than it is now, but I guess you don't really notice that the first time you play. What you're looking for is this hitting the right spot? is it doing what you want it to do? And actually it did in the larger part, but it did it in what I now think is a very overwrought way. And so it was a question of, okay, let's sketch this thing. Okay, let's don't worry about making it elegant or efficient or beautiful lines or anything like that. Just get what you want sketched out. Is it doing, regardless of the mechanics inside, your input and your output, are they what you want it to be? And if the answer is yes, then it's a question of refining and processing and working out more efficient ways to get the same effect, and whether you need all of those rules to do the same thing, and whether you can replace 3 rules with one better rule that does the same thing, and then working out, that's a nice to have. But at the end of the day, I talk about this thing. I definitely didn't invent it, but I couldn't tell you where the concept comes from. But the concept of a cognitive load in gaming, it's just the idea that everything that you put in adds to the amount of effort that the player is having to go through in order to play your game. And you need to make sure that it's worth it. It's a cost-benefit calculation. And there's a whole load of things, and I think something that designers do wrong, particularly when they first start out designing, they try and cram everything in, and they fall in love with their own ideas, and particularly the good ideas still don't always belong. It might be fantastic. You can save it for a different game. If it doesn't belong where you put it, get rid of it. And so when we start talking a little bit later about Elia Chronicles, I'll come back to that point, because that's something that I think is really important, working out what you're trying to achieve and working out. And I don't think this is just games. I think it's designing anything. Everything should be pointing in the direction you want to go, and everything that's in there should be achieving your goals, the goals that you've set out for yourself. And if your goals are good ones, and you made the right choices to begin with, and you go through that process carefully and you do it well, then you will end up with a good finished product.
So out of curiosity, let's say that I got the first handwritten copy of Drowned Earth in my hands, and then I've got the current rulebook for Drowned Earth. What survived the entire process? Was there something that was in the initial draft, the initial versions of Drowned Earth that still exists? What's something that either didn't change at all or changed minimally? Or did everything change? Would they seem like two different games to me?
Do you know, it's such a long time ago. And it was in development for 2 years before I put it on Kickstarter. And that started off very slowly, and, the odd evening, a couple of times a month. And then it turned into, several times a week, playtesting and writing and refining. And I don't remember exactly. I'm fairly sure that the reaction mechanic hasn't changed a great deal. The dice mechanic was tinkered with quite a lot in terms of thinking about what critical fails look like, and but I'm pretty sure the dice mechanic has survived almost intact. Things like how do you resolve ties? Those changed, a number of different times, but the core was there. The movement became much more elegant. It started off as doing what I was trying to do, which is find an easy way to do all of those things. But there were different movement types, and you had to remember what the different movement types were. And it occurred to me that there really doesn't need to be different movement types. All you need to so actually this doesn't make sense unless I really explain the movement mechanic. If you have 2 movement values, you have 2 values for a lot of things, and generally what they pertain to is whether you have succeeded or whether you've succeeded especially well. And that's basically whether you pass on 1 or 2 of the dice, and you actually need to pass on them in a specific order. You've got to pass on 1 before the other one matters.
Gotcha.
And so if so you have 2 movement values, a higher and a lower. And if you are running along normally and not doing anything particularly complicated, you don't need to roll the dice for that. but you use the higher number. If you're swimming, originally you had to test for swimming, and I got rid of that. You can swim without testing, but you use the lower number. And if you're doing anything like leaping or climbing, in fact, there was leaping, climbing. There were a number of different maneuvers that you could do. Then you need to roll the dice, and whether and how far you go just depends on which dice result you've got, so the lower or the higher. And so you declare your movement, you roll the dice, and you go as many inches as the dice roll allowed you to go.
Interesting.
And so originally there were different ways of resolving the different types of movement and some special rules which differentiated them from each other. And then I thought that's kind of in the way and doesn't need to be there. So now you can run 3 inches to a wall, climb up it 2 inches, then leap 2 inches to another building, and then keep on climbing. And all you do to do that is you measure your movement path, and you say, okay, well, that's 7. So my maximum move, my what we call nailed it, that's the better success. You have pass and nailed it. Your pass movement is 4, your nailed it movement is 7. If you nail it, you move all 7, and if you pass, then you go along the movement path that you declared, but you only go 4 inches along.
Got it. Now, we talked about that spectrum of from elegant, I'll say, to clunky, right? And complicated to simple. And there's benefits as you go up and down that spectrum. And it sounded like you're really trying to simplify without losing interest, right? Because if you get too simple, then it's not interesting anymore. What part of Drowned Earth pulled you and tempted you the most to pull away from the simplicity? So if you look at the path you went through in that design process, which one tempted you the most to overdo or to over design? Was it the movement, or was there another aspect that really you struggled with?
Yeah, I think the movement was just a case of I worked out what I wanted to achieve, and I thought of a way of doing it, and then I slowly whittled that down into a really sleek, lean mechanic. I think probably the thing that, and I still struggle with it now, it's special skills. And so they're not mechanics. They're not core mechanics. They're kind of tacked on mechanics, but it's always tempting. You release a new model and you're like, oh, what extra cool skills can we add to this model? And I do try to leave a Post-it note on my proverbial, bathroom mirror saying, use ones that already exist wherever possible. Only bring in a new one if it matters and if it makes a difference and if it's important. And one of the reasons you see a lot of games do it, they get rules bloat. And in order to keep the existing players interested, they make the game far less accessible for new players. And that's a huge problem, and it's a very difficult problem to resolve, I think. And I don't think I've got a firm answer other than be aware of the fact that that's a problem and try not to go too far down that road.
Yeah, that's tough. It's really tough because every company struggles with this. I've yet to play a miniature game that is more than a single release, that has wave releases, that does not dance with that bloat devil. And the fact that I've yet to see a perfect solution to it yet tells you just how difficult that is. Yeah. But having that vision obviously is what has to keep driving you forward in that process. Now let's talk about thematic. So we got a little bit of the design process. I want to understand the setting of Drowned Earth and when that came alive. So at what point did these game ideas start to get a world, and where did that world come from?
I would say that maybe the world came first. And I think it's a fusion of basically, I sort of joke, and it's partly a joke. It is a little bit true, that I was the coolest I've ever been when I was about 9 and 10. And so, that kind of uninhibited child, not being embarrassed of liking things. And actually you get into your teenage years and you're mortified, by that 9-year-old, that you were. And then you get out out of your teenage years, and you're mortified by the teenager that you were, the big stuffed shirt, and you look back on your preteen likes and dislikes and think, yeah, I had it right then. And, I remember this is not gaming related at all, but my mother loves to tell the story that my first desired profession, what do you want to be, little boy, kind of thing. I wanted to be a tap dancing detective. I think I'd seen too many
worst crossover ever.
and Fred Astaire films or something. I don't know what she was bringing me up on at that stage.
I'm glad you got into gaming and didn't go that way.
But yeah, that's, I when I was that age, I liked dinosaurs and jungle ruins and Indiana Jones style stuff, and I like Planet of the Apes and all of these other kinds of things, and I thought it was a sort of a cool bunch of things to add. But really, the starting point for the world, or probably the biggest influence to begin with, there's very little of it left, other than just, I guess, some of the geography. But there's a 1960s British science fiction author called J.G. Ballard. And if you've ever seen Empire of the Sun, that's actually the story of his childhood. I've forgotten the actor's name. He's a famous British actor. But yeah, he's the little boy, J.G. Ballard.
Interesting.
And Christian Bale is the kid in Empire of the Sun. But yeah, he grew up to be a science fiction author, and he wrote a book called The Drowned World. And it's a story. It's actually, I think it's probably set like 11 years ago. In reality, in the late 90s was the distant future.
The Blade Runner future.
Yeah, exactly. So he, the story was, he was way ahead of his time, melted ice caps and risen sea levels, and hugely increased climate. Most of the planet was bordering on uninhabitable, and there was a colony in the Arctic, and a group of scientists had gone back to London, which was now, like most of the cities of Europe, a network of lagoons, with a whole load of kind of, iguana and reptiles and jungle plants and crocodiles and things like that. And it just struck me as a really, really cool environment, and really it fired my imagination. And he talks in the book about, there's a kind of sort of semi-spiritual thing about people not spiritual, but sort of very cerebral people devolving back and having some kind of ancestral memory for this earlier epoch. And all of the reptiles kind of, going back and sort of emulating their ancestors and that sort of thing. And it's a very good and interesting book. It's not particularly long. I can thoroughly recommend it for any sci-fi readers out there. I mean, it's 1960s sci-fi, so it's not crazy exciting or anything like that.
Right.
But it was definitely a very firm influence on the world that I was already imagining, with kind of jungle ruins and that sort of thing.
So that gives me kind of the feel for it. And obviously, for it to be a war game, there has to be conflict. So give me an idea, now that we got an idea of the setting, what's the conflict? Why are people putting models on the table and beating the hell out of each other?
So the factions are actually, they're not sort of geographically or racially defined. They're vocationally defined. So you've got the gangster organized crime faction, and then you've got the archaeologist, adventurer, Tomb Raider faction. You've got the town militia. You've got the bounty hunter stroke slave breakers. And then you've got a true mercenary faction. And then in the new game, which has a lot of crossover, so the model ranges are shared. We're bringing out a new faction for Drowned Earth as part of this release as well, and it's pirates. It had to be either pirates or ninjas.
That was inevitable, wasn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. It was the piece of the pie that was missing from my 9-year-old enthusiasms.
So you've got pirates, you've got Indiana Jones.
Yep.
So I think all that's left is zombies, right? Is that the only thing missing? You got dinosaurs.
Maybe the dinosaurs ate all the zombies already. They're slow moving enough that they didn't last long. The conflict comes from the fact that it's what I guess you could call post-apocalyptic. It's not, the apocalypse is not within living memory. Nobody can remember even what happened. But there's the evidence of this big science fiction, globe-spanning civilization where, everything's overgrown and collapsed, and lots of vegetation and earth on top, and every so often you see this spire sort of stabbing out of the jungle canopy, but people are now beginning, after many hundreds of years of just trying to survive the terrifying predators that live in the jungle, which were all, revived species from this advanced civilization who found themselves in an environment which was much better suited to them than the one that they were originally brought into. Now people are coming together and making settlements and building towns and even cities, and getting a little bit of sort of scientific innovation going. And they're searching the ruins for knowledge. And the conflict really is over how that knowledge is going to be used. Are people going to discover this new technology and rediscover things, both in terms of new scientific development or just finding artifacts which are still functioning and can be used as power sources? So there's a city called The Bridge, which basically spans a bay to the enclosing portion of a bay, and the town has been built on this old suspension bridge, and it's powered by a power source that somebody found in the jungle. The entire city has electricity and lights and even sort of rudimentary wired telephones and things like that, because of this relic that they found. That they don't know how it works. They've got no idea, but they know when they plug it in, they get electricity out of it.
Right.
And so there's the conflict that's going on is about whether we're going to use this knowledge to benefit everyone, or whether we are going to try and be selfish and use it to control and gain kind of power and influence.
So that's interesting to me. So now that we've got a feel for the process that you went through from a game design standpoint, how you did some world building, obviously they come together, and the game, the final stage in the story of Drowned Earth, up to this point, would be you then decide, I'm going to launch this thing. And what I've always found fascinating is when do you stop? So you play test, you add, you write background, you design, what you think the different factions and groups are going to be. But at some point you say, okay, pencils down. We're going to stop this right now. We're going to put this out there, and we're going to charge people money for it.
Yeah.
I'd like to get an idea from a design standpoint. When do you do that? Like, was it a time mark? Was it a design mark? Was it, I'm now, when does that happen? When do you say, screw it, I'm putting it on a Kickstarter?
So I didn't self-impose a deadline. I waited until I felt like it was a good product. And then, that's one answer to your question. The other answer to your question is about a month before we went to print, which is about 6 months after the Kickstarter, because obviously I sold it and it did very well, and I was proud of it. And as I was putting the finishing touches on, I obviously saw opportunities to improve it, and I didn't want to pass those opportunities up. And in particular, the rule book, in terms of presentation and in terms of wording and in terms of the way that I explained things, that changed a lot. The rules themselves didn't so much, but there was refinement and improvement. I think it's important not to set yourself a deadline when something's in its infancy. Designing to a deadline is a bad idea. When it comes to putting you've got you've got the groundwork laid, and you're basically tidying everything up and improving it and making it as good as it can be, then you obviously do need to set a deadline, because you could carry on making it forever.
Right.
And it's still, even now that, you know, I play it or I read something and I think I can think of a better way to do that. But I'm not an enormous fan of games that constantly release new editions of themselves. It feels a little bit like it's one of two things. Either you didn't do your job properly the first time around, or you're trying to milk the cash cow, and you're releasing new editions because it's an opportunity to boost sales. And I think a better way to do that is just to keep on making good things for the game that you've got. And that isn't to say that I will never come up with a second edition, because there comes a point, I think, particularly what we were talking about earlier with the rules bloat, where actually you need to clarify. I think Malifaux did that.
They sure did. That's exactly what drove
control.
Yep.
And so they just hemmed it in and brought it back. And a few of my friends who play Infinity say that they were hoping that the N3 rules were going to do that, but they just like doubled down on the complication rather than sort of reining it in. And so I feel like that's something that you can do. You can bring out a new edition to streamline what you've got and to condense it and to cut away some of the bloat, and then create a reset effectively. But generally, I think that it's a bad idea to design with a deadline in mind. You'll end up, the deadline will become more important than the quality of the product, and that's no good. When, as I said, though, when you're refining something and putting the finishing touches on it, you need, sometimes the best way is probably to have an arbitrary deadline where you're like, well, I know really what I'm doing is tinkering, and after this point, I'm just not allowed to tinker anymore.
Yep. Yeah. At some point, you got to make the call, and I would imagine, like you said, when the changes become minute, at some point you got to stop. Otherwise, it never comes out, right? Well, that's good. So let's take another break, James. When we get back from this break, I want to talk a little bit more about advice that we can offer. So as somebody who has gone through the process once, has had a very successful self-published game, is now about to go through the process and finish up the second time doing this with a new game, I'd like to get an idea of things that you got right, mistakes that you made, mistakes you made the first time that you think you got right this time. I'd like to give some advice for some people out there that are thinking of taking the same path. So we'll be right back. Howdy friends, Craig here. Nothing makes Malifaux easier than having the right tools. Here at the third floor, we love all the licensed Malifaux goodies from Custom Meeple. Not only are they helping support this podcast, they sell custom-made weird licensed tokens and terrain. They sell it all. Crew boxes, terrain, markers, tokens, and even a 3x3 full Malifaux board. Custom Meeple sells a complete M3E token set covering every marker and token you need to play. Custom Meeple are the source for the official accessories for Malifaux. Everything is designed by hand and authorized by Weird Games. Check them out at custommeeple.com, that's with one M, or follow the link in the show notes. Up your Malifaux game and be sure to tell them Craig from the third floor sent you. If you use the promo code Third Floor Friend, all one word, THIRDFLOORFRIEND, you'll get a 5% discount and help support the podcast. It's valid on everything except retail products and playmats. So I've, because I do this podcast, I've gotten a chance to talk to, a lot of people that have put out games, and I've had conversations, with people around the world that have ideas and are thinking about this. And James, you're unique because you've done it once and it was a success. You now are doing it again, and building off of that success, with a new game. And I would like to kind of get an idea of, the potholes that you stepped into, ones that you happen to avoid, things where, Maybe you were right because you're a smart guy. Things you were right because you just got lucky. And things that you did this time that you didn't do last time. So I'm going to start off by phrasing it this way. So how long ago was it? How many years ago did Drowned Earth start? When did the idea start to come fruition? 5 years, 10 years ago?
5 years, I would say.
So let's pretend you could now tell 5 years ago, James, 3 things before you really started getting serious about this. What are things that you know now that you wish you knew 5 years ago?
I guess so. At that time, I think I would say don't worry too much about the fact that you're not getting as valuable playtesting as you want to, because you never will.
Interesting. What do you mean by that? That's interesting.
I think it's a really big making a board game is a little bit different because you can provide somebody with everything they need to play that they can lay out in 10 minutes and they can pack up in 10 minutes.
Right.
A miniatures game is a much bigger commitment, and expecting people to play test it is a much bigger commitment.
Yep.
And so you will find there are lots and lots and lots of people who are really enthusiastic about playtesting your game until it actually comes to doing it. And so, and I think it's easy to, as a sort of first time or pre-release designer, to become disheartened by that and to take it personally and to think that it's you, and that maybe your game isn't interesting or good enough or anything like that. And it isn't that at all. It's that when it's released and there are thousands of people playing your game and, you actually make a living from it, you're still going to find it really hard to get reliable playtesters who are committed and who are, committed to giving you regular high quality feedback.
Yeah, that valuable feedback's got to be difficult.
Yeah.
So you felt like you would want to reset the expectations that you had back then.
Don't worry so much about it. Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. If you were, now that you're doing your second Kickstarter now, and you're putting out your second game, though they are related, and we'll get into that. What are things that you're doing this time that you'd wish you had done the first time? What are you getting right that you maybe didn't get quite as right the first time?
I think it's the opposite. I think there are a bunch of things that I'm not doing this time that I did the first time, because the first time I didn't know what was going to work and what wasn't. And so I did everything. And I burned myself out really hard. I didn't want to look at a computer or social media for 2 months afterwards. And it wasn't a question of being burned out on the project. I was just burned out on working really hard and on interacting with people on social media. I delivered a month early, so that it wasn't a question of not wanting to follow through with the project. I was still really enthusiastic and excited about actually delivering the game. But I just worked too hard, basically. And a lot of it was meaningless nonsense, and I didn't need to do it at all. And it didn't help, or it helped such a tiny amount that it wasn't worth the, to the cost benefit ratio thing. I mean, what I would say also, just from a commercial point of view, is more advertising would have been great. But last time I didn't have the budget, so it wasn't. I'd put every penny that I had available into developing the game and developing an entire product range of miniatures, and so I didn't have any money to put towards advertising. Maybe I could have just started with 2 factions and some extra models for those factions, and spent some money on advertising. I still don't think that would be the right move. I still think that I was better off starting with 4 so that there was proper variety. Sure. In addition, the Kickstarter wouldn't have made as much money, because something that I definitely didn't understand at the time was that way more people than you think were just going to say, screw it, I want everything.
That's me, by the way.
Yeah.
I like when I go to Kickstarter and I go, oh, this looks cool. I just scroll down to the bottom and I start from the bottom and scroll up.
Need. And so, this time I understood that a little bit more this time because I've also got a functioning business and, we have a website and we sell through distribution and I've actually got, a regular income coming in from Drowned Earth sales. I was able to devote some money to advertising this time and it was worth it. It's something that works. So that's a bit of advice I would give myself that I wasn't really in a position to have taken advantage of. It's just the position I'm in now, which is a bit different.
Now, have you farmed out more this time than last time? So, for example, did you find something that you were doing yourself that you now have found people? You're now hiring people to do it for you. So, things like did you hire people to do the art in the first one and you're hiring people to do art in this one? Or were there things that you did the first time, either out of necessity or naivete, that now you said, no, I can actually pay somebody to do it for this second game?
That's what I've been promising myself all along, that I will stop doing everything and outsource more. So I've outsourced some of the social outreach and contacting influencers and social media and stuff like that. Those are things that I've outsourced. I've done all the graphic design myself. I did it the first the whole project page I did the video editing. The video editing and filming, I edited the first video, and I was happy to edit the second. I wasn't happy to film the second. That's entirely coronavirus related, that I found myself in my living room with a DSLR
with a camera
and not able to get my friend, the professional cameraman, to come and help me take footage. And also I didn't have a really good prototype of the game, also coronavirus related, to film, because it's just been really hard. Supply lines have broken down and it's been, everything's been delayed, and getting, for the manufacturer to get the material has been difficult, and then they've got delays. And, if you're doing anything in China, obviously they've had their own, all the factories were closed for 2 months. And so they had a huge backlog. And so sending out things like review copies was very challenging. We managed to do a few, but not many. But I have ended up doing more things than I thought I was going to for that reason. Graphic design wise, I'm a competent graphic designer and I quite like doing it. And I'm a terrible control freak and think that I'll do a better job than the person that I could afford to employ. There are definitely graphic designers out there who will knock my work right out of the park, but I probably can't afford them.
Sure.
So I've ended up outsourcing a little bit more this time than last time, but not as much as I would like, I guess.
So out of curiosity, James, there was a moment when the last copy of Drowned Earth went out and you were completely fulfilled as far as your commitments on Kickstarter. What happened after that? Were there challenges in supporting the game after delivery?
Yeah, definitely. And that's another answer to the same question of what would you do? What would you tell yourself if you could, go through a little time machine or have a time telephone and have a conversation? After the first Kickstarter, really, it was a slightly different time. Games Workshop hadn't woken up and decided not to suck. When I was still making, when I was making Drowned Earth, and then sometime between me finishing the Kickstarter and delivering it, they did wake up and decide not to suck, which was a little bit of a blow. I think I would have been doing a bit better had they. It
would have been great if they sucked for a little bit longer.
just a bit. Just let me get my toe in the door. But I think my initial plan was not to go back to Kickstarter, but to try to create strong relationships with traditional distribution channels, and that proved really hard, I would say.
Yeah.
And I sort of naively thought that people would come knocking, and a few did. I had a French distributor approach me, a big one, and initiate the relationship. And then I sent out some emails. I didn't want UK distribution because at that stage I realized sales were going to be small enough that it wouldn't be advantageous for me to do that. Now I do have a UK distributor, and in the US as well, and in Europe. But I think that it would have been more sensible for me to go back to Kickstarter sooner than I did. Because really the reason why distributors are interested in you is not because they think you've got a great product that they will be able to promote, but because you've got a product that you've promoted really well already that everybody wants to buy and they can make free money. And I sort of felt like I would grow in a relationship with a distributor that was going to take me by the hand and we'd make some money together. And I think part of that is also related to the Games Workshop not sucking thing, that my expectation was based on the way that the industry worked the year before I launched the Kickstarter, not the year after. And I think things changed at that time, and people were much more risk adverse, because overnight the independent miniatures share of the industry halved. And so, well-known games were going out of business. And so for little old me to say, why don't you take a chance and start distributing my game and spend some money on promoting it to your customers, that was a little bit unrealistic. I'm not sure I could have known, but there it is.
No, there's no way of knowing. And I can tell you, James, surviving that the way you did is a big deal. So, hats off to the quality of both your execution and the product, because to your point, a lot of much larger game makers than you did not survive that. And to be a non-GW miniatures game right now means you're and being able to survive is a big deal. So for us as gamers, the one upside to that is that I think that even if you don't play GW anymore, they raise the bar, and I think that the overall quality of gaming is better because of their renewed successes and their ability to snatch victory out in the
I think there's two things. I think actually one of the reasons why they don't suck anymore is because the independent miniature scene has got so strong and started making really great games and stole back and stole a huge amount of their market share because they got lazy and complacent and were not doing the job right. And now they, after setting the bar so high and then having that bar exceeded while their standards were dropping, they have now realized where the bar is and started pitching back at it. And the other thing which I think is really important about Games Workshop and why I'm not at all sad that they've woken up and started not sucking anymore is I'm not a gateway to our hobby. No 9-year-old kid is going to get enthusiastic about what I'm doing or even hear about what I'm doing. And Games Workshop still has a high street presence, and they still have a lot of reach, and they get people into our hobby who then eventually get bored of Games Workshop games and look at the independent miniatures scene and say, there's some cool stuff going on there. How about I'll dabble in that? And lots don't, and that's also fine. But
no, I agree. I mean, Games Workshop will bring them in. Then they'll realize that the quality of the rules matter, and then they go play other games.
Well, you can say that.
All right. So last question before we go to a break. I'd like to get an idea of maybe one place where you felt you just got lucky. So in the journey between James does not have a game on the market to James now has one game and is about to have another game on the market, where do you think you got the luckiest, where it was not necessarily you doing something right, but you just got lucky? I
feel very lucky to have met the artists that I've met. And I think that the quality of the game, obviously it comes down a little bit down to your as a creator, your curation of that art is a big part of it. But I think that it's much more difficult than people think, even when you've got a fistful of dollars, to actually get the right people to work for you. Because in the art world, it's actually a seller's market, and there's lots of really talented people out there, but they're in serious demand, and it's not difficult to hire an artist, but it is difficult to hire a good artist, and maintaining that level of quality and maintaining those relationships with artists is hard. And I've got some fantastic ones, and I'm really grateful that they are willing to work for me. And that sounds insane. That's like, what, they don't like money? It's like, no, but
I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, I know exactly what you mean. All right, guys, let's take a quick break. When we get back from this break, I want to do a small segment about Drowned Earth, because I know there's some listeners that have actually maybe not seen the game or played the game, and I want to talk a little bit about what Drowned Earth is and kind of give it an elevator pitch on why you maybe should be playing Drowned Earth. So we'll be right back. Howdy friends, here on the third floor you'll find us playing Malifaux and other games on Mats by Mars. They are scratch resistant, waterproof, wet erase Marco compatible, and lighter than neoprene. These mats use a new material that almost eliminates any glare. Mats by Mars gives you over 40 designs to choose from. Pick a mat size, pick a design, then choose an overlay like the one for Marvel Crisis Protocol or Malifaux 3rd Edition, Strats and Schemes. It's going to speed up your deployment and the placement of strategy and objective markers. Until the end of June 2020, you can use the new promo code ThirdFloor620 to get a 10% discount on your next order. In the notes, you can ask for the Third Floor Wars logo to be put on your mat for free. Again, use the promo code ThirdFloor620, that's THIRDFLOOR620, to get a 10% discount. All the details are in the show notes. So now we've kind of set the table, James. We've, I think, given everybody a really good idea who you are from a philosophical design perspective. We've kind of gone through the process of going from I just create games to I sell games and I support games. But I want to go back to Drowned Earth real quick, because the more I've seen about it, the more I've heard about it, the more I've looked at it, the more interesting the game gets. So someone listening right now has never played Drowned Earth. What are the key things they need to know to decide whether they should be playing this game or not?
Well, it's a skirmish scale alternate activation miniatures game, which is character based. Most of the models on your crew are going to be named characters with specific and unique, or not necessarily unique, but specific skills, unique combinations of skills and weapons, which allow your models to work together to achieve different aims. You are playing on a fairly dense board of probably waterlogged ruins, overgrown, lots of jungle terrain. So aquarium plants from eBay are definitely your friend as far as the scenery building is concerned. And it's scenario based and very cinematic, both in terms of the way that the scenarios are designed, but also the way that the mechanics lend themselves to that kind of cinematic action. And so I think the only other really important thing to say about it is you can have dinosaurs on your crew.
And pirates now, too.
And pirates as well now, yeah.
So out of curiosity, just real quick, first of all, how long does it take to typically to play your typical game of Drowned Earth? So I've got all our models are on the table. We start the clock. How long is it going to take before the game ends?
Depends on points value. If you're playing with starter boxes only, which is 5 models a side, and I very intentionally made the starter boxes a full game, not a kind of like, here's a taste now, like
Sure.
the drug dealer at the school gates kind of thing. You can have a very full and satisfying game of Drowned Earth with just 5 models a side, using what's in the starter boxes. That game will probably, depending on the scenario and depending on how whether one of you starts to win really quickly, it'll probably take somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour.
Okay.
And when you get up to, let's say, 120 or 125 points, which is a more typical points value for games, then it's probably going to take more like an hour and 20 to an hour and a half, something like that. It varies depending on model count. Some scenarios are quicker than others. There are 6 core scenarios in the rulebook. And the other thing is that our tournament system is a little bit different to most, in the sense that you bring a model pool. That's not so different, but you are allowed to list build differently for different scenarios, because the different scenarios during the tournament are actually at different points levels. So your first game might be 85 points, your second game might be 110.
Well, yeah, that's something that is similar to Malifaux, and something that I love about Malifaux. And it's neat that you have adopted that. So someone comes up to you and says, I'm not sure whether I'd like Drowned Earth or not. What are some games that they would be playing now that would tell you, yeah, you would definitely like Drowned Earth? So people that play what games would enjoy Drowned Earth in your mind?
So, well, you've already said it. People have called Drowned Earth Infinity Light.
Nice.
And I'm perfectly. Some people think that that's a kind of pejorative, but I'm perfectly happy with it. I think that the Drowned Earth is still a very deep tactical experience, but just that you're spending more time looking at the battlefield than the rulebook. So that's definitely on the roadmap. I guess I wouldn't say that the game, it being character based, I think it reminds people of games like Guild Ball. Guild Ball is much more about emergent gameplay from skill synergies than Drowned Earth. Drowned Earth is still quite a lot about the core mechanics. And the skills have a part to play. It's more luck based, I would say, than Guild Ball. There are ways to mitigate your luck and to offset that luck portion at the important times, but they are limited. And so I guess those are the main ones that I would mention.
So I'd be curious, before we take another break and talk about the new game, other than games you've designed, can you give me a handful of games, and it can be board games? What are games that right now you're really enjoying? I'm
a massive fan of the Arkham Horror, the card game.
Oh yeah,
that's really great. I've borrowed some mechanics from that for the new game, which I'll talk about a bit later. And I'm not at all ashamed of that, and I'm very happy to cite my influences. I don't see any problem with that. So I'm also. I'm going to mention Pandemic Legacy actually as one of the sort of most engaging game experiences I've had, board game wise. I play a fair amount of viticulture with my other half. It's a worker placement game about owning vineyards in Tuscany and growing wine. And it's a very sort of it's the sort of game that I'm normally not hugely keen on in the sense that it's a fairly dry Euro game with that's all about, there's no real conflict, and it's all about building and making things. But there's just something very nice and satisfying about it nonetheless. I like Imperial Assault, probably my favorite board game of all time that I never get out because it's an enormous time investment and an enormous investment in remembering how to play the damn thing, is the War of the Ring, the old Lord of the Rings war game, board game, not the Games Workshop, right? Like small scale war game, but.
I've never played it, but I've heard that it's a phenomenal game.
Yeah, it's great.
It's really immersive as hell. So the last thing I'll ask you, and you can decline to answer if you wish. What is the one game that everybody loves that you've tried and just said, you know what, for whatever reason, I just don't like this game?
There are quite a few.
Let's try one.
Yeah, I'm just like, what's the sort of quintessential, I don't get that, but everybody likes it?
Yeah, a game that everybody talks about and likes, and you tried it, and it doesn't mean it's a bad game. It just wasn't a game that you enjoyed.
Yeah, I mean, I think Warhammer 40k is probably on my list, although I have to say I haven't played the last 8 editions. I think it's probably only in 8th edition, but yeah, I think I've
7 editions have come out in the last year. So
right, yeah, yeah, I haven't played it for a long time, but yeah, it's not my thing.
So you never were a 40k player then? You never went through that phase?
Yeah,
it's just
I did a little bit, but I think we were always. As kids in our early teens, we didn't have enough pocket money.
Sure.
And, people talk about it being expensive now, and they sort of, oh, do you remember where they were all £1 a model? It's like, yeah, but a pint of beer was also £1, exactly. It was still really expensive, or it seemed really expensive at the time. But yeah, I think we mostly played Warhammer Fantasy. And so we couldn't really afford to do both. But I think for my Games Workshop, fondest memories really are all the specialist games. We really liked. We played Space Marine, the epic game, and a lot of Blood Bowl. More latterly, eventually Necromunda. We played my cat is being demanding. We played the forerunner of Necromunda, which was called Confrontation, which was over the course of a number of White Dwarf magazines given away for free, and then it later became Necromunda. We had a lot of like crazy and silly fun with that. If I had another time machine, I'd go back to that time in my life and try and tell my younger self that winning and losing. Caring too much about winning and losing really thematic games ruins the game, and you will have much more fun if you just try and tell a really cool story.
Yep, I could not agree more. So, James, let's take one more break. When we get back from this break, I want to talk about the new game, which is a sister game in the same world as Drowned Earth.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
All right, so we'll be right back.
And my name is Jacob Suderman, and my dad is a patron of the Third Floor Wars. I like the Third Floor Wars because the deep dives tell me a lot about a master, and when I get my second master, I'm going to use the deep dives to tell which one I want. Hey, you should be a patron too.
Recently, we broke 100 patrons. I want to thank our most recent patrons, Marcus Moore, DrawnX, Joshua Story, Peter Pot, Sergey Chapovalov, Super Hottie 69, Adam Talbot, and Richie Richmitten. Thank you.
So, James, the reason I was able to trick you into coming on the show is that you have got a Kickstarter that, as when we release this, has got right about a week left before it closes out, and that's the Ulea Chronicles.
Well, actually, we've just finished out our first week, so we've still got another 3 weeks to go, I think, just about.
Right, I'm talking about when we release this, though. We're going to be releasing.
Okay, yes.
we're in a time machine.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're going to be releasing this about a week before it closes. So talk to me about Ulea Chronicles. What if someone now has understood where you come from, they understand and get an idea of what Drowned Earth is, how do we transition them into saying, you may want to go check this out?
Well, Ulea Chronicles started off as a development project. It started off as an expansion to Drowned Earth, and it still functions as an expansion to Drowned Earth, but it just started to become its own thing, and it made sense to release it as a standalone product, which has enough in the box that you can use a lot of the stuff in the Drowned Earth, and I'll explain a little bit more about that now. But basically, I think the best way to put it is, if I went back to the start and took all of the mechanical ideas that I wanted to make with the Drowned Earth, but I instead wanted to make a solo and co-op game where you played against the game, that's what Ulea Chronicles is.
Interesting. So I didn't realize that. So it's a cooperative game, or it's a you versus the game?
It's you versus the game, yeah. So you can play it solo, you can play it with friends. But it has the campaign structure of a dungeon crawler. So there's a whole series of narrative games which are threaded together by an overarching story. It's a branching campaign, so you will get to make choices both during the game, and the games also, each individual scenario branches a little bit. And I mentioned Arkham Horror, the card game, and we use a similar mechanic to that in terms of decks of cards which lead to the next card, and then perhaps you've got a choice on the back of the card which gives you you can swap up option number A or option number B, and so there's different ways to play through that scenario. And then in between games, you might have choices which end up resulting in you playing scenario A instead of scenario B. And so there's a fair amount of replayability there. You can go back and change it. Again, as you're going through the game, making what I like to call meaningful choices. I think that's what games are about, really.
It's interesting that you had a typical skirmish game where you had one person playing another person, right? Now you're looking at having people playing together or by themselves. The hard part about that is coming up with an interesting opponent when the opponent is the game. So can you walk me through kind of the AI concept?
Sure. And that's another thing. So earlier, I'll sort of, before I answer that question, I'll sort of bring back something we were talking about earlier, where we were talking about design aims and in terms of one of the important goals being to remember your goals and to stick to them. And what is this game trying to do? And it would have been very easy for me to grandfather in the entirety of the Drowned Earth mechanics and just impose a bunch of AI stuff on them. And really the reason why we ended up moving away from it being an expansion to the Drowned Earth and it more being a standalone game that has a bunch of mechanics that you can import into the Drowned Earth, is that I realized that there were a whole load of Drowned Earth things that just weren't doing. They were doing what I wanted Drowned Earth to do, but they weren't serving this goal of giving you a really interesting narrative and interesting gameplay experience as a solo or cooperative player playing against the game. And so that was difficult. It was like, okay, we're going to get rid of the movement. That's the key defining characteristic of the Drowned Earth. We're not going to do the dynamic movement. And I thought, no, we don't need to. It's a game in a box. It's one purchase. It's got standees in it. You can replace the standees with miniatures if you're a miniatures gamer. If you're not, you don't need to. It has a mat. It has beautiful scenery tiles by the same artist that did Imperial Assault, that did the latest science fiction version of Zombicide. Wow! I'm really proud of them. They're stunning. But back to the point. It was very important for me to present a lean experience that was doing what I wanted it to do, and being married to two different ideas, having this kind of AI and campaign structure, while at the same time having this very dynamic cinematic movement experience type game. They just didn't gel together particularly well. And so, or at least they kind of did, but there was just more than there needed to be. So for people that want both, not necessarily the story part, but the AI part, I've designed it so that it can be imported into the Drowned Earth. And the way that we've done that is that we use each enemy type has a deck of cards, and each different species of dinosaur has a different deck of cards, so that we program them with behavior which is characteristic and predictable but not random. If that, unpredictable, but not random. You can have a guess at what they might do because of the personality of that dino type. Until you flip the card, you obviously don't know.
Interesting. So you talked about Arkham Horror, the card game, having an influence, right? Is there any other AI out there that you've come across on the tabletop that you also, maybe not, that maybe inspired you? Where you said, that's interesting how this game handles its AI. This is interesting. Where else did you find nuggets that maybe, again, not that you used that mechanics, but you found it either well executed or inspiring, and you see this as being influenced by it?
So there are several, and one of them, it's really terrible, but because I can't remember the name of it, but there's an old. Actually, I don't even know if it's old. It's just an old style of game. A counter and hex World War II war game. Right? And when I say war game, I mean war game in what board gamers call a war game, not what we miniature gamers call a war game. And it had a very smart AI system where it had programmed movement that you looked up in a book on a table, I think. And the things that each of the different unit types did were very clever, and they just worked. It was fiddly to use, but the effect was great. So you had, is there somebody out? If there's an if-else type system, it's an infantry unit. Is it out in the open? Is there anybody within range of it? Okay, then it sprints towards the nearest cover and tries to engage anybody in that cover. And is it an armored unit? Okay, well, it doesn't care about cover, so it just rolls out into the open and tries to get the best shot. It was really intelligently designed, and it felt truly intelligent. But like you were flicking through pages of a book and looking up on tables, and it took a long time. It was unwieldy. The other one that I like, and the influence of giving each, originally I had all of the dinos were controlled by a single dino deck. Well, there were two actually, ranged and close combat. And the way in which I was trying to impart the individual character of each species of dino was in the way that they was in their profile cards. So basically there were action triggers on the cards, and the specific action was on the profile card. And again, that was a little bit fiddly, but I was trying to run it all with a single deck. For component limitation reasons. And I've owned Gloomhaven since it came out, and I've played I played less than 10% of what's in the box because I could probably play it for a year and only get through a quarter of it. But that's what made me realize, hang on a minute, you only need 10 cards for each. You really like that game. It has controlled movement, programmed movement, but each enemy type uses a different, or at least there are archetypes for each. Each deck is an archetype. That just made me think, hang on, you don't need one big deck. You can have lots of little decks, and that means that each dino can have its own deck. That was a great thing. Another one I looked at, which I don't think is as successful as I would like, but there were things in it which I found interesting, particularly in the way that the instructions were presented, is the app implementation of Star Wars Imperial Assault. And and the AI there does some weird things at times, and it's a little bit ambiguous. It's not always clear. You kind of have to go back to the rules and say, oh, hang on, okay, so what's the priority? Well, it wants to be 4 away from everyone, and what is that? And it can't. So which is it going to prioritize? And things like that, which are just a little bit confusing. And so, but there's plenty of good stuff in there as well. So I think those are probably the 3 that I looked at the most. I also looked at the Mantic Walking Dead game a little bit.
Oh,
I think,
yeah.
For me, the AI is a little bit. It's a bit bare bones, perhaps, and I think that works because it's zombies, and they aren't going to do like complicated or sophisticated stuff. By nature, they're not intelligent, so it doesn't need to be AI properly. I think the turn order was a little bit had a bit of an influence there, perhaps, but not necessarily the instructions themselves.
Gotcha. That's great. Well, James, I appreciate you coming on, man. It's very exciting to really kind of get the curtain pulled back and to understand what this whole process is like. And during the break, one of the first things I said to James is, son of a bitch is going to make me buy his game, because you said a lot of things that got me excited and interesting. And I was also telling James that, one of the things that's probably the biggest benefit of doing this podcast is I now have kind of a pool of people whose opinions I trust. And really kind of the reason I think that James and I ended up with connecting is because I kept hearing everybody talking about Drowned Earth, and now I got a better idea of why. So, James, we're going to have links to the Kickstarter in the show notes, so that people can reach out. They can also obviously search for the Ulaya Chronicles. That's ULAYA. It's also in the title of the podcast episode as well. James, is there any other last things that people should know before we wrap up?
I think that more or less covers it. The Drowned Earth as a game is available to buy right now. We'll also, if you're not desperate for things tomorrow, you'll be able to, if you back the Kickstarter Ulaya Chronicles, then a lot of the components and things that you need for Drowned Earth are in the core box as well. The miniatures are all backwards compatible, so we're going to be releasing profile cards for all of them, and even we might, by the time people are listening to this, we might have unlocked some of the alpha profiles, which will ship. These are dino types that are not in the Ulaya Chronicles box but you might want to use to ramp up the difficulty or to add some variety, or you might want to use them in your Drowned Earth games. When you buy that alpha sculpt for an existing dino type, it will come with the AI deck for that dino type, as well as the profile cards for both games. So there's a lot of backwards compatibility there. The Drowned Earth rules are free to download from our website. Obviously, the hardback book has all of the fluff and a special rules chapter and mounted models and lots of cool extra stuff. But you can get going with the full rules completely free. So yeah, come and join us. We've got a fantastic community on Facebook. There's a very lively Discord channel. Probably the thing that somebody asked me what I'm the most proud of, and actually it isn't the game, it's the community that surrounds the game. Great to be a part of.
Oh, well, I think the community can be very telling, James. It's something that with Malifaux that kept me loving the game so much, is that it's one of the highest quality community I've come across. Yeah. And I think it's a reflection of the game itself. So I think being proud of the community is a way to be proud of what you've created. So, all right, James, thanks so much. And for those of you that stuck around to the end, thanks for listening. Take care. Be sure to check out our shop on thirdfloorwars.com for the latest gaming apparel and gear. While you're there, check out how the USFO Tour is shaping up. How does your conference compare to the others in the United States? Where do you rank nationally? Get those models built, painted, and on the table so we can see you at the US Masters Invitational in October of 2020. Also, rate and write a review on this podcast for us. It really helps us find people almost as cool as you are. Thanks for listening. Howdy friend, Craig here. Is this episode making you realize you need to buy some models? Gadzooks Gaming is my favorite online retailer because of their large selection, killer prices, and great customer service. Don't you hate buying an entire crew box when you only need one model? Gadzooks sells crew box models individually and saves you a ton of money. They even have free shipping to the US and Canada if you spend $100 or more. Swing by gadzooksgaming.com and make sure you tell them Craig from the Third Floor sent you. All the details are in the show notes. Howdy folks, Craig here. Now if you love gadgets as much as we do, you're going to love the new Third Floor Wars Gadget Bundle from Schooner Labs. Branded with the logo of your favorite podcast, it comes with 2 measuring multi-tools, a compass stepper for those tight and important movements, along with a compact dashboard to track your turn, strat, and scheme scoring along with your soul stones and pass tokens. It is the perfect bundle for anyone who plays Malifaux or just wants to look cool while doing it. The link is in the show notes. Check them out and help support your favorite gaming podcast. All right, that was good, bud.
Excellent.
That was good, and we
Excellent.
kept it right at an hour and a half. I like it.
Good stuff.
I'm gonna end up buying your stupid game.
Well, I do feel like I talk to a lot of very smart people who've never heard of it, and they play it and they're like, "This is great. Why isn't this better known?" And I think the answer is really simple. It's because it's just me, and it's really hard
it's
to
small.
make yourself heard
Well,
over the din of everything else. And marketing is really tricky.
yeah, it is, and it for me, the most constraining resource I have is time.
Yeah.
But because I do this podcast, I have now got a stable of about 10 people who I have spent enough time with that I know that if they like something, that I'll like it.
Yeah.
So they become my curators.
Yeah.
And the 2 games that have now caught wildfire among that pool of people is you and God Tier are the
Right.
2 games
Yeah.
that I hear about the most.
And I still haven't. I've got a whole load of metal God Tier models, because a very close friend of mine was operations manager for Steamforged for quite a while. Now he works for Element Games, which is the company that distributed Guild Ball to begin with, but I've never done anything with them, and I've never played it, and I can't. The same with Marvel as well. I'm really eager to play that, but I've spent so long, all of my gaming time really recently, other than board games. I have 2 regular board gaming sessions every week. Both of them are just taken up by. I mean, other than that, all of the rest of my gaming time is just taken up by playtesting.
It has to be. No,
Yeah.
I totally get it. Yeah. God Tier, at some point I got to try it. And I got to try Drowned Earth. And if you get a chance, don't buy it. But if you get a chance to play the Marvel game, it's a good game. It's not a great game.
Yeah.
But it's a really good game.
Yeah.
And the reason I think you might be interested in it is it sacrifices a lot for fun.
Yeah.
Which I really appreciated. The most strategic games I've ever played were never Marvel Crisis Protocol, but in the last 2 years, some of my most fun was playing Marvel Crisis Protocol.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'll bring us back. All right, so this will be the last segment that we talk about the design process. After this, when we get into the Drowned Earth segment, a lot of it we've actually covered already. So that might be a short segment because we've ended up talking more about Drowned Earth than I thought we would, though it's been good. And that will buy us more time to talk about Ulea. So perfect.
Cool.
And we'll keep this short too. This will be a short segment.
Sure.
That was excellent. Excellent.
Good.
Yep. All right.
It's actually quite nice to talk about Drowned Earth a little bit because, of course, I've been talking mostly about Ulea Chronicles, which is more or less the same game, but it's being marketed as a separate title. It's a simplification, and it's important to me that it's a standalone game and a kind of pick up and play as well.
Yeah, and kind of my thought was, people know you from Drowned Earth, they don't know you from the new Kickstarter. So, and I think what we'll do is in the first couple segments, we'll build credibility, get people excited to go, you know what, I kind of dig how this guy thinks. Yeah. Then we'll talk Drowned Earth, which is an established game. and then we'll spend the last 15, 20 minutes talking about the new game. And I think progressive-wise for the audience, for somebody who's not familiar with any of it, it'll kind of take them through the story.
That's exactly my approach. I feel like the first title is the one to talk about, and particularly since it's the parent game of the Kickstarter that I'm selling now, so to speak.
Good. All right, I'll bring us back.
Sure. About really.
All right, Pumpkin, you want to say hi to James real quick?
Sure. Hi.
Hello, how are you?
We're almost done, so I'll come back downstairs in about 10 minutes. Okay, we're almost finished. Do you ask James where he lives?
Do you live in London?
I do live in England, yeah. I live in London.
Does he sound like he lives in London?
I can't hear him because I think it's because of my hair.
Oh, okay.
What did you hit on you?
No, you're right. You're good. All right, honey. I'll be down in about 10 minutes, okay? I love you. Did we lose James? Can you talk for a second, James?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, I can hear you.
Yep.
Okay, good. I'll be down. Would you what do you are you watching TV? Okay, I'll be down in about 10 minutes. You want a what? A burrito? Well, we're going to do Taco Tuesday. I know. If you want to go grab some fruit snacks, you can grab some fruit snacks. All right, I'll be right back. Sorry about that, man.
No problem at all. It's the beauty of post-editing, right?
Exactly. All right, so we just got done talking about kind of the cooperative nature of it. What are some key things that we want to make sure we cover here?
So I think I was talking about the branching structure of the campaign. That's kind of important. Yep. The card mechanic that drives the AI. So all of the dinos have a little AI deck.
Let me ask you an AI question, because that was actually one thing I was thinking about.
Yep.
So, all right. So James,